What on earth does it mean to call Jesus a Savior? That's the question that's been governing my sermon series that we started with Easter. And I thought I'd change up the normal devotions each week because there's a lot of stuff that I don't really get into in the sermon, and a lot of that's just because it doesn't always serve the purpose of the movement of a sermon. And so I thought each week we are talking about a different type of approach to handling what on earth is Jesus doing on the cross and on Easter Sunday, and how do we understand that? And so I thought maybe each week I would just give you a glimpse into some more thoughts about that week's topic. And so playing catch up a bit, and we were going to talk about Easter Sunday. And on Easter Sunday we talked about peace, as what is it for Jesus to bring peace into a conflicted world? And Jesus in the scene shows up to his disciples and keeps saying, "Peace be with you." And in a world that is not at peace, that is in conflict all of the time, that is counter to the experience of anxieties and fears and frustrations and conflict that we deal with every day. And so I want to talk about a little bit of a system and a theory that's underneath the piece of that story and that sermon. And that's to talk about Rene Girard and his theory of scapegoating. It's got more fancy titles with mimetic theory and whatnot. But what Girard tried to talk about was that in human behaviors, we tend to desire things that become limited in supply, and then we fight over them and we get into conflict. And at some point, there's a resentment that emerges in groups when we don't have the things that we want, and we decide who to blame. And in Christian theology, you can talk about the Garden of Eden scene of we always want to blame somebody. And in our systems, we blame people and we make them the bad guy. And then if we can inflict some violence on them and some punishment on them, it gives us this catharsis, like we fixed a wrong in the world. Now, the heightened versions of this, the ugly, terrible versions of this, are things like 1930s and 1940s Nazi Germany, with them blaming all of their post-World War I woes on Jewish people and on other groups. And obviously it had nothing to do with the challenges that they were facing as a country, but they were looking for someone other than themselves to hold responsible. In modern society, in our current day, people want to blame immigrants, people want to blame trans kids, and just decide that here's the groups we think are the reason that we're going through all the problems that we've got. And this scapegoating that happens, you build up all of this tension and energy to bring violence upon your scapegoat. Now, in Christian theology, you could map that onto the Jesus scene, that the religious leaders in Jerusalem, they don't like Jesus because of his challenges on the religious system, and maybe they just don't agree with his theology, but they have reasons that they want to push their angst onto Jesus, and they get Rome involved and say, hey, you have reasons that you should also blame him, you don't want him to kind of rattle up the group and rattle up the people and to turn against you. And so can we have this cathartic moment where we want to crucify Jesus? Now, the thing that happens that changes the story is that you have this fundamental challenge to this ongoing scapegoating. When Jesus shows up resurrected on Easter Sunday, usually the scapegoat doesn't come back. And so when Jesus shows back up, it is meant to kind of disprove the system of violence. Your whole aims at this method of handling your problems, it didn't work. And the innocent scapegoat is resurrected and is brought back, and it reshapes your imagination of our systems of violence and our cycles of violence, they never actually get us what we want. And God is offering another path forward. What's tricky is Girard's view of this kind of peacemaking Jesus, the scapegoat that is resurrected and makes a new opportunity for people to remove their guilt and shame because the innocent one is resurrected, and we can kind of turn back time and deal with this trauma and find new healing and peace. The challenge of that is so much of Christian theology in the West is quite opposite to that picture. For a lot of substitutionary models of atonement that are satisfaction models, God is the one who demands justice and demands the violence in the story and kind of transforms the human, sinfulness and corruption and makes it this temple peace offering, makes it this sacrificial lamb. And obviously that language gets used a lot. But what's weird in that story then becomes like that God is the one demanding the scapegoat, and thankfully it's not us. In the Abraham and Isaac scene, there's a ram that gets Abraham out of sacrificing his son, but when it's Jesus, we map it onto that story and we say, well, God didn't withhold his son, that God actually does need the violence. And that's tough, because if you're coming at it from Gerard and that atonement model design of like this desire for pain to fix our problems never actually is meaningful and never actually wins, that makes it tough whenever that theological model requires God to desire that thing. And so Gerard's model of God is peacemaking, not because God needs to crucify Jesus, but because every time the earth crucifies someone, God is willing to resurrect the innocent. And Jesus is the first fruits of that and the model of that, to break us loose from this imagination we have that violence is ever going to fix anything. And so I don't want to finish or ease the tension of how do you understand Jesus. This Easter series has got, I think, 6 weeks of different approaches to understanding what Jesus does to save us. But the first model is, what is it for Jesus just to bring peace and to stop the systems of violence, stop the cycles of violence, and to hope for a better world. And so as you wrestle with how do you understand what Easter means or what Good Friday means, be aware of like, where is there peace? Where is there violence? Who needs the violence? And what is God's call in this world? And so hopefully that little glimpse behind the scene might add some extra weight and extra depth as you reflect on this topic. I encourage you, if you haven't, go watch the full sermon. I think the title was, Is It Too Late for Peace? From Easter Sunday. So let me know what you think about, like, how is Jesus Savior for you? And as we go through each week, let me know which of those models speaks to you the most. So thanks for listening.